and welcome to Book Circle. I'm Earl Weinberg. This time we're going to continue reading Henrietta Sees It Through by Joyce Dennis. Letters by an Imaginary Lady on the Home Front in England during World War II. July 15th, 1942. My dear Robert, when the war started, I decided that anything in the way of relaxation and fun would be wrong, and I spent all my spare time weeding. The result of all this well-doing was that the war became a little wheel which went round and round in my head, and Lady B complained that I had got into the habit of frowning. "What do you think about when you weed?" she said to me one day as she sat and watched me busy among the onions. "Well, all down that row I worried about the linnet, and all down this one I'm worrying about Bill, and for the next 3 rows I worried about Libya, and for the next 2 our shipping losses, and—" "Stop!" said Lady B. "I'm an old woman," she went on, "and nobody expects me to do more than knit, but I never take a knitting needle in my hand again if I couldn't read at the same time and thus occupy my thoughts." "I wonder if one could read and weed," I said. "Of course you couldn't," said Lady B, "but it's time you snapped out of all this gloom, Henrietta. I think you'd better enter for the bowling tournament." "But I haven't played bowls since the war began." "That doesn't matter. I shall enter too," said Lady B recklessly. "It will be unfortunate for our partners, but good for their self-control." Lady B and I entered for the bowling tournament. She drew the Admiral as her partner, and I drew Colonel Simpkins. Neither Colonel Simpkins nor the Admiral was pleased, but they generously decided to make the best of it. Lady B and I were, of course, delighted when we found we had drawn each other in the first round as opponents. "It's a pity we have to play with 4 woods instead of 2, said Lady B, "but we can soon trundle them down and then have a nice chat." We trundled them down, and the people on the rinks on either side brought them back. The Admiral and Colonel Simpkins became rather red in the face, but said nothing. "Now they've got the whole rink to themselves," said Lady B, settling herself comfortably on a seat. "I like your shirt, Henrietta. Where did you get it?" "I made it out of some of Charles' old pajamas. I used the legs for sleeves." "My dear, how brilliant of you. I often wonder why men wear out the seats of their pajamas the way they do. The collar's good." "I lined it." "Just pull up your jersey and let me see the back." "Yes, it's definitely a success, and the color is delightful. Charles must have looked sweet in it." "He did, rather." A shadow fell across our knees, and we looked up to see the Admiral standing before us. "Would it be too much to ask you ladies to pay a little attention to the game?" he said in a shaking voice. "Well, Admiral, darling," said Lady B, "our shots were so terribly bad they didn't seem really worth taking an interest in, if you know what I mean." "And your partner's play is a matter of indifference to you?" "Of course not," said Lady B, looking a little guilty, "but we feel we can leave it all to you and Colonel Simpkins." The Admiral, who admires the clinging woman, was slightly mollified by this remark, as Lady B intended he should be. "I suppose you wouldn't care to tell us from time to time which shot lies nearest the jack?" he said. "But of course," said Lady B, and she turned her attention for the first time to the rink where 8 woods were clustered neatly round the little white jack. It is your shot, Admiral dear, which is lying." "On the contrary, it is Colonel Simpkins," said the Admiral gloomily as he walked back to his place. "I'm going to try very, very hard this time," said Lady B to me in a low voice as she prepared for her next shot. Then she took a deep breath, shut her eyes, and sent her wood rolling down the green. It trundled gently along, curved round, and came to rest an inch from the jack. Lady B turned pale and clutched my arm. "Henrietta, look what I've done," she said. "Good shot!" yelled the Admiral. "Oh, false friend," I said bitterly, and sent down one of my usual ones. 25 yards short," called Colonel Simpkins sadly. Lady B, uplifted and inspired, made another brilliant shot which hit the jack, and her wood was marked with a cross in white chalk. "I don't think I've ever felt so proud in my life," said Lady B, who had had triumphs in many European embassies. "Look at all the people watching," I said. "Don't talk, please, Henrietta," said Lady B in a remote way. "I want to concentrate." Lady B and the Admiral won the bowling tournament. I went up to see them play their finals. A large crowd had assembled to watch. Lady B demanded perfect silence before she played each shot, and even asked a croquet player on a distant lawn not to make a clicking noise with the balls. Halfway through the game, she had a brandy and soda brought out to her from the bar. Just before the end, inspiration left her, and she began playing in her old and, to me, more attractive style. But by that time, she and the Admiral were so far ahead they couldn't lose. "I'm glad I've lost the touch," she said comfortably, coming to sit beside me. "Being good at games takes all the fun out of them. My dear, do look at Mrs. Whinebite's hat." Always your affectionate childhood's friend, Henrietta. July 29th, 1942. My dear Robert, Mrs. Savernacks gave a party last week. We all brought our own food, and at the end there was a collection for the canteen, but still it was a party and caused more excitement and gave more pleasure than anything that has happened here for a long time. Mrs. Savernacks had her cousin, who is a real cabinet minister, staying with her, and she asked us all to come in our very best clothes because of the cabinet minister's wife, who, Mrs. Savernacks said, is considered the best-dressed woman in London. You can imagine what a stir that caused, but of course everybody was simply delighted to have a chance of wearing their very best, because there's a strong feeling down here that unless particularly requested to do so by one's hostess, any form of full rig is unpatriotic. Everybody rushed to get furs and feather boas out of moth-proof bags, and best frocks, which had been hanging between sheets for at least 2 years, were taken down and tenderly ironed. 2 days before the party, I found Lady B in the street, breathing wistfully on the glass window of Matilda, our dress shop. "Do you see that little black hat, Henrietta?" she said. "Well, I want it for the party." "Are you sure?" I said, because Lady B always used to get her hats in Paris, and has vowed more than once that nothing less distinguished shall rest upon her head until every German has been driven from the sacred soil of France. "Perfectly sure," said Lady B firmly. "I've only made a mistake over a hat once in my life, and that was when I was 17. It was made of pale blue chiffon and had a pink rose under the brim. It was a terrible hat, but the first time I wore it, Henry proposed to me. How odd it is that all the nicest men prefer a bad hat to a good one." I said yes. "I never thought I'd want to buy a hat out of our street, but I want that little hat," said Lady B, and she heaved a sigh which blurred quite a large patch on the shop window. "Buy it," I said. Lady B turned anxious blue eyes on me. "Do you think it would be helping Hitler?" she said in a low voice. "It would help Matilda's shop." It is sometimes very difficult to know what is the right thing to do," said Lady B, and she sighed again. I rubbed the glass with my handkerchief, and we gazed once more in silence at the little black hat. Then I said, "If you were to wire the brim of the hat you wore at the Thompson wedding, you could make it very like that one. But I'd never get a quill that color. I like the quill." "There are seagulls on the beach," I said, "and I have some colored inks." The weather on the day of the party was lovely, and I thought I had never seen the locals looking so smart and gay. But as soon as we caught sight of the best-dressed woman, we realized that the one thing we had forgotten to do was to shorten our skirts. This cast a dowdy gloom over the beginning of the party, though people were able to throw it off later and enjoy themselves. Lady B looked a peach in a home-trimmed hat, and personally I thought she left the best-dressed woman at the post, but that may be because I had a hand in the trimming. I wore my black London coat and my fox fur, mercifully preserved from the moth, and the hat I wore last time I lunched with you at the Savoy Grill. I remember you said you liked it, Robert, and so according to Lady B, either you are not a nice man or it is a bad hat. And how little real fun there is about these days, and what with these sad thoughts and my usual party panic, which attacks me on the doorstep, I arrived at Mrs. Savernacks' house in a very low state, and it was all I could do to get myself in at the front door. The first thing I did at the party was to tread on a tomato sandwich, which Colonel Simpkins had dropped on the floor, and grind it into the carpet with my heel. Drawing back with a cry of dismay, I bumped into the conductor, who spilled his tea down the back of my coat. The conductor mopped me up with his handkerchief, and we managed to scrape the tomato sandwich off the floor with a fire shovel without either Mr. or Mrs. Savernacks seeing. "And this is our doctor's wife," said Mrs. Savernacks, and I was propelled unwillingly into the presence. "I'm not. I'm Henrietta Brown," I said. "Yes," they said, with gracious government house smiles. At least, of course, I am the doctor's wife, but I'm Henrietta Brown, too, if you know what I mean. I always think it is rather depressing being called somebody's wife all the time." The best-dressed woman looked at me without sympathy. "It has always made me very proud," she said simply, and she and the cabinet minister exchanged a long, loving smile. After that, there was a pause. Feeling it was up to me to make a non-committal remark, I asked if they had seen the Savernacks garden. They said they had, and that the fruit was magnificent. I said, "We're going to have a plumper bum crop this year." Then Lady B came and led me away. Mrs. Weinbeit arrived late, wearing the Matilda model, and gave Lady B a very disagreeable look. Mrs. Weinbeit, who ought to always wear hats trimmed with raffia, and generally does, looked terrible in the Matilda, and nobody but she and Lady B and I recognized it as a twin. Always your affectionate childhood's friend, Henrietta. August 12th, 1942. My dear Robert, I have been having headaches. Evensong, who suffers dreadfully in her head, said they were nothing. I thought they were quite bad, but whenever I mentioned them to Charles, he said fretfully, "For goodness sake, don't let's have illness in the home." So at last I put on a hat and went and sat in his waiting room with all the other patients. Even that wasn't a success, because the patients said, "You won't mind if I go before you, will you? Because you can see the dear Dr. Brown any time, and I'm in such a hurry." So that in the end, I was the only one left, and Charles rushed in and said, "I'm awfully sorry, Henrietta, but I can't stop now. You must come another time." When the linnet comes home for some leave, I told her about my headaches. The linnet, who is a sympathetic child, listened with attention, and when Charles came in, she said in a sort of nurse's voice, "I think Mummy's got neurasthenia." "Then she'd better go and see Knox," said Charles in a relieved voice. Knox is the eminent psychiatrist who heals the mentally unstable in our cathedral city. Knox isn't his real name. We call him that because he is a nerve specialist, from which you will gather, dear Robert, that this family is not yet cured of its habit of making poor jokes. Nervo and Knox were a pair of well-known music hall comedians and members of the immensely popular Crazy Gang. The following Wednesday, I was shown into the hushed stillness of Knox's exquisite waiting room. I sat there in great contentment. I was a patient at last. I hadn't enjoyed such a luxury for years. A secretary with a face like a Madonna stole silently into the room. "Will you come this way, Mrs. Brown?" she said with a gentle smile, and I tiptoed into the presence. "My dear Henrietta," said Knox, "I am delighted to see you, but what brings you here?" "I've got neurasthenia," I said proudly. "Dear me," said Knox in his kindly way, "and how have you managed to get that?" "Do you think it might be the war?" "It's a possibility." Knox's room was cool and dim, and the patient's chair a cradle of billowing comfort. After answering one or two sympathetic questions about the children, matins, evensong, and shopping in the street, my tongue was loosened and a torrent of words poured from my lips. Knox listened with the deepest attention. From time to time he made an attempt to say something himself, but I waved him aside and swept onward, borne on the torrent of my own loquacity. I was a patient with neurasthenia, and I had often heard Charles say that they did nothing but talk about themselves. Well, here was my chance. It might never occur again, and I was going to make the best of it. At the end of an hour, I paused for breath, and Knox rang the bell and asked the secretary to bring me a glass of water. "All you have told me is very interesting," I said. "Is it?" I said in a hoarse voice, and opened my mouth to begin again. "Tell me," said Knox quickly, "do you ever have dreams?" "Often." "Peculiar dreams?" "Very peculiar. I once dreamt that I went to put something in the oven, and there, curled up on the bottom shelf, was a tiny little kangaroo. And another time I dreamt that Charles had grown a long, drooping mustache." "Nothing more peculiar than that?" "If you don't think a kangaroo in the gas cooker is peculiar, I do." "Perhaps," said Knox sadly, and wrote it down in his little book. "She looks very flushed and excited, doesn't she?" said the linnet when I got home. "Was it nice, darling?" "It was lovely." "Have you got to be back to the bee and pollen yet?" said Charles. "I suppose you know you'll fall in love with the doctor," said Linnet. "They all do." "It's a very humiliating thought," I said. "Oh, I don't know," said the linnet. "I think Knox is rather sweet." "He's very sweet, but having everything you say written down in a little book and typed out by the secretary afterward is not my idea of a good love affair." "I see what you mean," said the linnet. Always your affectionate childhood's friend, Henrietta. P.S. My headaches have gone. September 9th, 1942. My dear Robert, every time I see one of those fuel target notices in the paper, a sort of film comes over my brain. But Charles likes problems, and he spent the whole of what would have been a free hour on Sunday afternoon working out how much coal, gas, coke, and electric light we would have to do without this winter. After a lot of muttering, he laid down his pencil and said, "That's easy. If we shut up the dining room and put one of those stoves in the drawing room, we ought to be all right." "Good. Of course, you must never light the gas fire in your bedroom or use the electric iron or the vacuum cleaner, and I'm afraid you'll have to shut up your studio and bring your work down to the drawing room. And Matins and Evensong must never have more than one burner alight at a time on the gas cooker. Otherwise, we can go on much as usual." "I see. I thought the government said that if we saved one lump of coal a day, that would be enough." "Did they say that?" said Charles. "They can't have meant it." Charles now calls himself Herr Fuel Obermeister and has developed the irritating habit of poking his head round the door of any room where I happen to be sitting and switching off the light, leaving me in darkness. He says that if we hit our fuel target, he would like to be called Herr von Fuel Obermeister. I have become a sort of unofficial fire watcher. I can't be a proper one because if Charles is out, there's nobody to answer the phone. But I have got a tin hat and a whistle with which to communicate with the fire watcher proper in the road below, and I walk about on the flat roof outside my bedroom. I was out there a few nights ago, admiring the moon on the sea and thinking that the hum of aeroplanes is quite the most disagreeable sound in the world, when I heard feet crunching on the gravel below. "Who's there?" I said in a loud whisper, leaning over the parapet. "It's Lady B," said a voice out of the shadows. "Can I come up?" "Wait a minute, and I'll come down and open the door." "Can't I come up the ladder?" "Well, if you really want to." "Of course I want to," said Lady B, and a minute later she was stepping nimbly over the parapet and onto the roof. By the light of the moon, I could see she was wearing a neat siren suit and tin hat. "How nice you look," I said. "Nonsense, Henrietta," said Lady B, "an old woman of my age," but I could hear she was pleased. I got her another camp stool, and we both sat down. "If Winston can, then I can," said Lady B. "Can what?" "Wear a siren suit." We sat in silence for a time, listening to the hum of aeroplanes overhead. Then I said, "We used to have such fun on this roof once upon a time." "And so you will again," said Lady B. "All those boys and girls so jolly, lying about in the sun enjoying themselves. And now—" I gulped, and Lady B put her hand on mine and gave it a little squeeze. There was a distant thump, and the roof shuddered gently beneath us. "A long way off," said Lady B. "Near for some people." "We mustn't get gloomy, Henrietta," said Lady B firmly. "Sitting here in the dark, one is inclined to, but we mustn't. We've got to keep on sending great thought waves of hope and cheer and confidence rushing round the world." She made a sweeping gesture with her arm and knocked my tin hat over my nose. Almost at once we heard the splatter of machine guns out to sea. "We're after 'em!" I cried. "Hurrah!" shouted Lady B. "God save the King!" There was a faint answering cheer from the fire watchers in the road below, and soon afterwards the all clear sounded. We sat and listened in happy silence to the blissful sound. "When the war is over," I said, "I'm going to have a gramophone record of the all clear and put it on every time I feel blue." We had tiptoed through my bedroom, where Charles was lying in an innocent and childlike sleep. Lady B leant over him and with loving care tucked the bedclothes round his shoulders. In the kitchen we made ourselves some delicious tea, and then Lady B went home. There are those who say that cups of tea in the night encourage sleep, but I am not one of them, and after I got back into bed I lay awake for a long time listening to Charles' gentle breathing and wishing I could have had a glass of milk. The birds were twittering before I finally dropped off. Almost at once the telephone rang. I could tell by the way Charles grunted into the receiver that he had got to go out, and after a few muttered curses he bumbled out of bed and into his dressing room. When he came back, the sun was shining in at the window. He stood at the foot of my bed and said, "You lucky little thing, sleeping away there so peacefully all night with nothing to disturb you." Always your affectionate childhood's friend, Henrietta. And we'll hear more from Henrietta next time.